The central concept in this class, the idea that our guiding question is built around, is agency. And when we talk about agency, what we're really talking about is the degree of control an individual or group of people have over their lives. So synonyms for agency are words like freedom and self-determination and control, right? Um, a useful way to understand the concept of agency is to think about what I like to call the spectrum of agency. And I've done a very crappy drawing of the spectrum of agency here for you. If you think of the far left side of the spectrum as a 1, a number 1, and the far right side of the spectrum as a number 10, there is a range of extremes when we talk about agency. On the number 1 end is what we might call complete determinism. That's when someone's life, and that someone can be an individual or a group of people, is completely controlled by social and cultural, biological forces that shape and control everything about them. In real life, number 1, complete determinism doesn't really exist. Even in a prison where someone has almost no control over their life, you still have control over certain aspects of your life. Even the many people in the world who live in abject poverty and suffer brutal life conditions still have some degree of control over at least small elements of their life. So in some way, the idea of complete determinism is a theoretical point, not a real one. On the other end of the spectrum is complete self-determination. Someone or a group of people have complete freedom. They're completely in charge of their life. They can do whatever they want. No social, biological, natural, environmental, or cultural forces shape who they are. This, too, is a theoretical abstract. It doesn't really exist. If you think you're completely free, have no responsibilities to anyone else, have nothing that shapes, controls, or influences you in your life, then you're actually a sociopath, right? You don't really understand the way the world works. So the reality is that most of us, as individuals and groups, fall somewhere on the spectrum. We might feel that we have a lot of agency and identify ourselves as a 7 or 8 on the spectrum. We might feel that we have very little agency and identify ourselves as a 3 or 4, or we might feel at some balance point where we have some agency, but we also don't in other ways, and we might identify ourselves in the middle, like a 5. If I think about my own life, I'm actually very fortunate. I'm a very privileged person. In terms of race, class, and gender, I fit all the places in our culture where people are given privilege. I'm a white, highly educated male professional. All of those things give me a lot of privilege and access. People of other racial groups, people of other gender and sexual orientations, people of other class status face much more challenging limitations to their opportunity and freedom than I do. So in many ways, I have a lot of self-determination. I have a lot of agency. But even someone as privileged as me can face realities in their lives that limit their agency, that constrain who they are, how they think, what they do. So in my case, the pandemic is an example of something that's had a huge influence on my life. It's reshaped my work, it's reshaped how I think, how I teach, what my job looks like. It's very different from the job I originally had. There's a lot more attention to what and how I teach. I have less freedom as a teacher. I'm a parent, so I have responsibilities to my wife and kids. I'm a homeowner in Temecula. Oh, it's awful. And that gives me all sorts of financial security and opportunity, but it also gives me all sorts of obligations, financial obligations and responsibilities. So even someone as privileged as me has constraints or limitations on his agency. Right now, I got to tell you, in life, I'm feeling like I don't have a lot of agency. I'd probably normally identify myself as a 4 on the spectrum. But in this exact moment, I'm feeling a lot of agency because I love teaching and I love this process of sharing ideas and explaining things to students. So if you ask me about my agency in the moment, I'd probably say I'm a 6, maybe even a 7. I'm just so excited to be doing what I'm doing. I'm feeling very free. I'm feeling like I can really determine who I am. So one of the interesting points about that is agency is always in flux. You're not locked into a agency place for all of your life and even part of your life. In a given year, in a given day, in a given month, agency can change for you depending on where you are, what cultural role you're playing, what's happening in the world around you. So a couple of key ideas about agency. Number one, agency is individual and collective. Number two, agency refers to the social, to our ability to control our own lives, either as an individual or a group, in the face of social and natural forces that can limit our agency, that can expand our agency. And here's the really important third point, can do both of those things sometimes. There are things in our life and the world that can limit our agency and also expand our agency at the same time. I like to call this the paradox of agency. A great example of this is our relationship with our families. Many of us have relationships with our families or experiences with our families that expand our agency, that give us a sense of freedom, that empower us in our lives to move forward and find happiness. But also, almost all of us have experiences with our family that limit our agency. It might be rules that our parents impose on us or interactions with family members that limit us or limit our perspective or impact our freedom. This can happen to people who are poor and oppressed and people who are privileged in a society. For example, I grew up with highly educated, privileged parents, but alcohol and drug abuse was a major problem in my family and affected my parents and their behaviors and had a devastating effect on an aunt of mine who in particular was a heroin addict literally until she died in her 60s. And that shaped my life experience as a child and as an adult. So even privileged people can experience the paradox of agency. The family they grow up in can give them many things, but also limit them. So agency can be paradoxical. We can be limited by something that also empowers us. So we want to think about that last concept of the paradox of agency as we move forward. So hopefully you've got some good ideas from this lecture. If you didn't take notes while I was talking, I suggest you stop, go back, watch it again, and jot down your notes. There's some really key terms here. Can you define agency? Do you understand its elements? And do you, in particular, understand the ideas of social, natural, cultural forces that limit our agency, that expand our agency, or, here's the big one, paradoxically do both at the same time? This is a key concept for the course, so feel free to come back here and re-listen as the semester goes on.